course, coming off the big NFL draft, which is in the books again for this year. And look, man, I don't want to say – I'm not going to go out and go on a limb and say that the Cowboys actually, quote, won the draft, right? I don't think you can sit there and say they actually were the best draft class of any team in the NFL. I do think there's probably a couple others that are happy with what they did and quite frankly, had a little bit more to work with in terms of picks. But from everything I can see from my very uneducated fan perspective, Dallas did what they had to do in this draft and hit a home run with it.
Everywhere I'm seeing is a grade of A. I mean, I guess you could have been an A+, but I mean, like, if you're getting an A, that means that by and large the analysts, and look, you know how it is with draft, it's like with recruiting. It's all on paper right now. I mean, yeah, we've got video, but we haven't seen him at a professional level. But it's all on paper. But on paper, for sure, top 3, I would say, in the NFL, which is a bit of a deviation from the norm.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction that you mentioned there. And look, as a Cowboy fan, and I even mentioned it on Friday, I think, it's the greatest day of the year as a Cowboy fan for the last 30 years because it brings you hope. And then the fall arrives and all hope is lost very quickly, usually. Sometimes it does extend and then the hope is lost, in January of all places and times, which is a little bit more kick to the teeth. But sitting here today with the picks they brought in, 7 of them, to be honest, and I'll just say this because I never looked at, I've never seen Anthony Smith play a football game. The receiver they took in the 7th round.
Yeah.
Everyone up until that point, the previous 6 picks, I think were A, really good football players potentially, and B, filled a need for the football team. And they were even actually able to bring in via trade a much-needed veteran linebacker in D. Winters, right, from San Francisco.
Yeah.
Getting him and the kid from Michigan, the Barham kid, who, depending on who you talk to and you listen to, I have some Michigan fans who tell me that he's got all the ability, all the mentality. You just got to kind of sometimes teach him where to go and how to do it and hope he's in the right spot. But as far as the ability goes, man, I mean, you watch his tape, that's a pretty impressive kid they got in the 3rd round.
Yeah, and I mean, you got an edge dude from Alabama whose name is LT. I mean, come on, you can't beat that right there, right? Yeah, but no, I think they obviously got better on defense, which, I mean, okay, that's a pretty low bar to improve that defense, but they really, I think they got a lot of versatility. That position edge that we put out there a lot, I think we just assume that's a defensive end, but not necessarily. Those edge guys can morph kind of between linebacker, defensive end, or some hybrid position like that. So I like that they kind of loaded up there. Obviously, the ringleader of it all is Caleb Downs, and that's a potential, a high level safety. Just by walking onto a team can make a poor secondary at least tolerable if you've got someone on that back end. So I'm excited for that. But yeah, I don't know what more the Cowboys could have done. Yeah, at least at the end of the day, you go into the season thinking whatever we could have done, we did in the draft.
Absolutely. So again, sitting here on Monday, April the 27th, as we record this, 2 days after the draft, my hopes are very high.
Yeah.
As high as they will ever be for the next 365 days. Right?
Understandably so, yeah.
And I'm going to need you in the fall
to
remind me, you're my spirit animal when it comes to that, Pastor. And keep me grounded. You say, hey, back on April 27th, remember that feeling you had? It was all roses and rainbows, and try to keep me from throwing them to the garbage dump again, as I inevitably will.
That's right.
Such is the experience of a lifetime Cowboys fan, around here.
Yes, sir.
Man, did you see the fall of Diego Pavia?
Man.
I was trying to think of, and naturally it goes back to last year a little bit with the fall, you know, the drop that you kept seeing with Shedeur Sanders. And I think if you kind of tie those two together, they're almost the same kind of situation in that, really, to get right down to it and just put it bluntly, the kind of the air and the attitude that these players may have brought into the room turned some teams off, turned every team off in the case of Pavia. I mean, up until late yesterday, you know, he was on the unemployment line looking for a job that may not have included anything related to football.
Yeah.
You know, what are your thoughts on? I mean, we've talked about Pavia throughout all last season as being you know, obviously a prime Heisman candidate, finished runner-up in the Heisman. But man, you talk about a fall from grace from a kid who had everything going for him in terms of likability, play style. You know, he was the underdog, and to get to the point where he is now, to where no one wants to touch him in the draft, you don't really see that. It's kind of a historic fall that he had.
Yeah, and I mean, some of it is a life lesson, right? You know, you want to act like a jerk. Sometimes people don't want to be around you. There's just a kind of a basic thing there. You know, I mean, he's listed at what, 6 foot tall. That's not really
He's not.
prototypical,
Yeah.
and he's not. So that he's already facing some disadvantages there. Look, I'm not saying he's a scrappy kid that knows how to make plays, kind of a Vandy's version of a Johnny Football, maybe. A little undersized, but also a little bit of a head case, and we saw him drop. I don't know. I mean, he might be able to latch on somewhere and make it. He's got enough in the tank to do it, but you can't blow through life in anything, even in a showman sport like football. You can't blow through life thinking that you're it and everybody else is beneath you and acting like it, and then be shocked when you kind of get slapped in the face.
Yeah.
That's just kind of
no one was shedding any tears for him on Saturday night, and that's very telling. You didn't hear a whole lot of, you know, crying for the injustice that was given to Diego Pavia, and they brought that on himself. You know, now he did, as of Sunday night, he did get an invite as an undrafted free agent with the Ravens, and so they're going to give him an opportunity. But you know, outside of the attitude, you know, I think you look at the measurables. He's literally a sub 5'10" quarterback who, you know, is limited physically in terms of just the NFL prototypical quarterback. And so he had all of that working against him, and he didn't need all this other stuff. You know, I will say this, by all accounts, it does appear just from the outside looking in that Shedeur got the message. And, you know, a lot of that stuff that kind of kept him falling down draft boards last year appeared to kind of dissipate a little bit, probably. I mean, you didn't hear a whole lot of the arrogance that was coming out of Brown's camp, because I think he was humbled a little bit. And sometimes kids need that. Sometimes there's other kids who are probably a little bit more mature and don't need that at that age. And so it is kind of a growing experience. So from Pavia's standpoint, I do hope he can learn that. And look, if he's good enough, he'll latch on. If he's not, he'll end up in the UFL or the CFL or something like that and try to build a career that way. But that was one of the interesting headlines coming out of the draft. You know, for one thing, I was watching the draft, and it never hit my mind that he was even on the board.
Yeah.
I had forgotten all about him, you know, because I just don't see him as a pro prospect. But there is no doubt the off the field stuff really hurt him in this process. Speaking of falling in the draft, I wanted to mention this too, because I've kind of developed a theory about this, and it was really honed in more. Look, man, you want to hit your draft picks every year, rounds 1 through 3. because 4 through 7 largely are what I call a crapshoot, man. I mean, it's like you're literally throwing darts at a board. We talked about how you don't know how these players, even first rounders, are going to respond. You for sure don't know these 4 through 7 kids. You hope you hit on a few every now and then. Dallas, for the most part, the Cowboys have hit on some of these fourth rounders, which was why I think they were, so hesitant to even consider giving up fourth rounders in trades. Now, the fifth rounders, the sixth rounders, and things like that, for every Tom Brady that you find there, you're going to find some guy who literally is working in the oil field a year after the draft. I mean, just, something like that. And that's not a knock on oil field workers. That just means that's not an NFL player's dream when they go into the draft, right? I mean, but that's kind of where they belong. And so, you're going to see that. And I think the actual draft presentation, I'm watching it on the TV the other night. I'm like, just make the pick. Just make the pick. It's like pick 200 in the draft, and it takes you 10 minutes to get the pick out because of all the pomp and circumstance they bring into it. Some of that's cool, but man, at that point in time, after a long weekend of 3 days, just tell me who the team picked, and let's move on, right?
Yeah,
I remember back in the day when this thing went 12 rounds, Matt. Imagine that.
Oh yeah. Well, and I really feel like in a lot of ways, that fourth round is where you're going to run into some guys that really are scrappy and got something to prove. They've managed to make something out of nothing or out of a difficult circumstance, and they've got something to prove. Or you're going to run into guys that it's like, wow, your talent's way better than fourth round. Why have you fallen here? Oh, and you hope you have more of the former than you do of the latter.
Absolutely. And it is, I mean, most NFL scouts will tell you it's guesswork at that point. I mean, you do your work and you do the best you can and you find out what you can. And then when you turn that card in, you're literally guessing as to what you're going to get. You won't know until you get them into mini camps and things like that. And I wonder how many coaches get these players on the field for the first time and say, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
What did we see in this kid? Also wanted to mention here again, looking back at some things from the NFL draft, and this always bothers me, and I may have mentioned this before on a podcast in the past, but these player interviews, man, they are so cringy to me. Why we continue to, put these kids up in a position to actually speak like that when it's obvious that they're not comfortable doing it. And then B, I've always thought, why at the college level, a kid can play 5, 6, 7 years even of college football and still not know how to conduct himself in a one-on-one interview.
Yeah.
Guys, let's teach these guys who are going to be pro football players how to talk in front of the camera when they're asked a question. Number one thing, and this sounds petty, but I'm going to say it because I'm a petty guy, especially when we're coming to talk about football. But, when I look at that, I'm like, it's obvious you're talking to a female reporter. Why do we have to say man?
Yeah.
M-A-N, right? It's a lady.
Yep.
Don't call her a man. Things like that. Do you notice things like that, or are you able to draw anything from these one-on-one on-the-spot interviews?
Boy, Arvell Reese was kind of the poster child for it, wasn't he? I mean, that was hard to watch as he tried to process basic answers. But yeah, no, I mean, like I as someone whose trade is mostly communication and someone who was raised by an English major who, writing and speaking properly was all very drilled into me from an early age. Like, it's kind of difficult. But at the same time, man, I don't know. It's I just wonder what it would be like for folks like that to be when have they had that sort of interview? I mean, like, I know they've had post-game interviews right after games, but this isn't in the context of a game. This is all just like, it's a huge party and there's lights and, hey, you've got a brand new team. By the way, I mean, I mentioned Arvell Reese. you're now moving to New York and starting a new life there for this franchise that's trying to turn everything around. What does that mean to you? Gosh, that's a lot. That is a whole lot to have to sum up. And so, yeah, I feel like it would be great if we could, I don't know, maybe have some questions that we give them ahead of time. And here are the 3 questions. You're going to be asked at least one of these 3 questions. And it's going to be basic. We're not going to ask you about this franchise that you're still learning about because you had no idea 5 minutes ago that you were going to be going there until you got drafted. But so that would maybe cut down on some of it. But I don't really fault the players because I just think that's a tight spot to be put into.
I agree. And just, I'll let everyone know out there, whenever we bring a guest on this podcast, I always let them know before we start recording, here's what I'm going to ask you, because I don't want them to be blindsided. I'm not into gotcha journalism. And the folks and the things we talk about, there's no need for that. And so I want them to be as prepared as possible. And you can tell that these kids have no idea what they're going to be asked in the biggest moment of their life. I mean, it is a little bit understandable that they really are a little bit speechless. The thing, the one that really made me really cringe the other night was the Mekhi Lemon, the Stevie Wonder imitation he was doing was just bizarre.
That was odd.
And you don't want to put a young athlete in that particular situation where he's, I just think it's unfair to do that to him in front of the entire nation in that moment.
Agree.
Moments later, maybe backstage, you do it not just just seconds, literally after he's shook hands with the commissioner on the stage. So just wanted to mention that out there. That's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine that apparently no one's listening to, because I've been shouting from the rafters on that one about we need to train these kids and teach them how to actually do interviews before they do interviews. And there's a lot of pro players who've been doing it in the league for years who still can't talk to an interviewer. I mean, they just don't know how to answer questions. Okay, I want to give you some quick stats here as we get ready to close out our draft coverage on the Right Team podcast. Matt, it just means more, literally more. 87 SEC players were drafted, which is the most by any single conference in NFL history. 21 more than the Big Ten. Kind of took it on the chin a little bit, I think, in the first round when you just look at first rounders. Of course, Ohio State had a lot to do with that with their first round players. But when you overall look at it here, 87 kids that played in the SEC got drafted this past weekend. Kind of troubling here. Well, not necessarily troubling. I think it's telling when you look at some of the lower classification, some of the lower kind of mid-major conferences. In the past, you would see those numbers inflated a bit. The gap between the SEC and the Power 4 conferences now is so telling of the age that we're in with NIL. And these kids who transfer from those smaller schools and lesser profile type schools into the bigger conferences now, and they get that SEC tag put on their name when they get drafted. And so that kind of has inflated these numbers a little bit. But I thought that was kind of telling. But the SEC, at least by overall draft picks, is still well ahead of all the other conferences in the country.
Yeah, the days of Jerry Rice and Steve McNair coming out of the SWAC and getting drafted are probably done by and large. But yeah, I mean, that was I think – I don't know that the SEC is like way better than it ever has been in the past. If it is, why can't we put anybody in a national championship game anymore? But I do think that the talent is always there. It's always going to be there, and that shows right there.
Over the last 3 years, you have 3 schools who are leading the way in terms of total players drafted. Texas, Georgia, and Ohio State over the last 3 years have had 29 players drafted. The Longhorns got shut out in the first round this year. but ended up, I think, with 6 players that were drafted in the later rounds. Texas A&M was actually tied for the lead, I believe, at number 10, or actually maybe second. I can't remember. I don't have that number in front of me, but the Aggies had a good showing in the draft this year. 10 players were drafted from Texas A&M. Coming in second over the last 3 years, of course, again, 2 big schools, Alabama and Michigan at 27 apiece. So you got 3 SEC schools and then 2 of the Big Ten schools rounding out the top 5 in terms of total players drafted over the last 3 years. Again, that kind of goes with what we were talking about.
And how about the kind of crazy, the fact that University of Texas was only 3rd in the state of Texas for number of players drafted, because Tech had 9. That kind of shows you, of course, the NIL boom there in Lubbock. I mean, look, you won the Big 12, you made the playoff, and you had 9 guys drafted. I'd say it's off to a good start. You have to feel pretty good about that. But yeah, it's still the main teams are the main teams. That's kind of the way it is. It's still that way. Some things may change, but by and large, they also stay the same.
If you look at the projected top 10 picks of next year's class, which we have also said on this podcast could be another historic draft class, this will make up for a little bit of an underwhelming class this year in terms of total talent. Let me just read you the top 10 players that are already in the 2020 or projected to be in the 2027 draft class. This is coming from the site I use to do my mock drafts, which is the PFSN, Pro Football Network. I'm just going to read you from the way they have them ranked here. I disagree with some of these rankings, but it's going to be very telling. And again, these things never pan out the way they do. I believe I think the same site had Garrett Nussmeier as a top 10 player last year at this time. So that's, take that into account when I read these. But these are pretty solid names. I don't see them falling too much. Number 1, they have Jeremiah Smith, wide receiver out of Ohio State. Number 2, the cornerback from Notre Dame, Leonard Moore. Number 3, this one kind of surprised me. They have Dante Moore, the quarterback from Oregon, actually ranked ahead of Arch Manning, who is actually coming in on this list at number 7 overall.
Okay.
I vehemently disagree with that. Edge from South Carolina, Dylan Stewart. And then I mentioned this before, and this is why I was not too upset with the Horns showing in the draft this year, because it's going to be made up next year. The 5th, 6th, and 7th spots here in the rankings of next year's draft class are all Texas Longhorns players. Number 5, Cam Coleman, wide receiver. Edge, Colin Simmons, and then Manning comes in at number 7. Again, I personally think, as we sit here today, it's unless he just completely falls off the rails this year, Arch Manning will be your top pick next year, or he'll come back to Texas. A Manning is not going to allow another Manning to not be the number 1 pick in the draft. The number 8 player they have ranked here is LSU offensive tackle Jordan Seaton. Number 9 is defensive tackle David Stone out of Oklahoma. And then rounding out the top 10 in the PFSN early 2027 draft rankings is Trevor Gooseby, offensive tackle out of Texas, which would give the Longhorns 4 of the top 10 ranked players in next year's draft. That's pretty impressive. That's your Ohio State comp from this year.
No doubt.
I do have some issues, like I said, with Arch Manning. I do believe whoever gets that pick next year, we may actually see some historic tanking in the NFL with guys like Manning and Dante Moore coming out. But, man, it's hard to argue somebody that would draft Jeremiah Smith and Cam Coleman at that spot, too. You have potentially up to maybe 5 potential top draft picks who are worthy of that. Just a crazy draft from talent next year.
Going to be wild. Really curious to see. Of course, as you've just said, I mean, there's a whole lot of things to shake out before we know all that. There's a whole season to be played. But, yeah, on the surface right now, it looks like a lot of talent.
That's your NFL draft. And, again, it was a lot of fun this week. And, again, I'm cautiously optimistic. Once again, hope springs eternal in April that the Cowboys at least are going to have an opportunity. Brad Burris, who was our guest on Friday's show, He and I were talking at church yesterday, and we're just like, man, we don't even care about the Super Bowl at this point. Just get us to an NFC championship game. If we can just get that monkey off our back, we're happy with that as Cowboy fans. That's how low the bar has become for America's team.
Ah, goodness.